Online at the C-SPAN Video Library, archived and searchable at cspan.org/video library. Washington Journal continues.
We want to focus on congressional hearings and the role of government oversight. Our guest is Danielle Bryan. She is the Executive Director of the Project on Government Oversight. Good morning. Thanks for being with us. There's a headline from CBS this past week on the GSA scandal. 4 hearings in the House and the Senate, wondering if Congress is engaged in hearing overkill. This, of course, looking into nearly $1 million being spent on a conference in Las Vegas. Certainly a lot of money, but pales in comparison to other potential areas of government waste.
Well, there's no doubt that it's ridiculous that 4 hearings are held on the same issue. The Congress needs to get its act together in that way so that they can all at least spend the time to find out what each hearing, they're happening almost simultaneously, so they had no opportunity to find out what one hearing is uncovering before the other one's happening. But I would have to say that frankly the Congress is not doing enough of that kind of oversight. So I would hope that at the end of the day that's not sort of the lesson learned, that the Congress should be doing less oversight. It's sort of good for them to be getting involved and saying, you know, how is the government spending its money? Because the Congress does not do nearly enough of that.
When the Republicans have control of the House and there's a Republican in the White House, like we saw during the Bush administration, or when the Democrats have control of Congress and there's a Democrat in the White House, like the Clinton or the Obama administrations, is there a difference compared to the opposing party having control of Congress when it comes to oversight, congressional hearings, and the like?
That's definitely become a problem in the last, I would say, 10 or 15 years. It didn't used to be that way. In the old days, there was much more of a sense of a pride in the institution of the Congress, where it really didn't matter who the party was. There was a sense that the Congress had a right to information from the executive branch. It didn't matter who was president. That sense has really been lost, and you have more of a sense that if you're in power, you're there to protect the administration, and that's a real problem.
Here's how Congressman Trey Gowdy, Republican of South Carolina, weighed in on this. He, of course, is a member of the House Oversight and Government Reform, a hearing that looked into GSA.
You know, Mr. Chairman, while this conference was being planned and executed, I was working in a small DA's office in South Carolina. We had budget cuts. We had to furlough secretaries that are making $20,000 a year. We started a fund out of our own pocket to pay for kids' birthday presents. We never thought about spending taxpayer money on it. Working for the government is a sacred trust which you have blown. So instead of a team-building exercise, you might want to investigate a trust-building exercise, because you have lost it.
And of course, this goes to the heart of the issue involving GSA and that now controversial 2010 conference in Las Vegas.
That was a great speech, and I'm glad he made that. I think it's tremendously embarrassing to find people in our government wasting our money that way, and it really does erode our country's faith in government entirely.
So what either advice or recommendation would you give congressional leaders, and in particular the chair of the key committees, Congressman Darrell Issa, for example, who is appearing today on NBC's Meet the Press?
Well, first of all, get your act together and talk to each other. It's not that hard to pick up the phone and find out who's going to handle the hearing, and also spend some time. You don't have to rush to the hearing. You can take a couple of days, learn what each of the people have learned. It's not necessarily that bad an idea to have multiple hearings. There are different angles to be pursued, and part of what is an important part of this story is the role of the Inspector General that actually uncovered this. That's actually sort of the success story here, is there were whistleblowers inside the GSA who came to the Inspector General and they actually uncovered these problems. So there are actually all kinds of lessons that can be learned from this.
And when is there a sense of overreach? There have been some who have complained that Congressman Issa has been on fishing expeditions, that he's been spending a lot of time and a lot of money searching for something when in many cases there's nothing there.
I have seen a couple of examples where there's a good idea and they take it too far. So when they do a Freedom of Information Act request, for example, they make it so broad that it's of every agency for too many years, and a little more thought, making it more surgical in the request, would actually, I think, result in a more fruitful inquiry by that committee.
202-737-0002, that's our line for Republicans, and 202-737-0001 if you are a Democrat. We also welcome independents, and if you're watching outside the United States on the BBC Parliament channel or elsewhere on cable or satellite, or you can join us on the web. Send us an email at journal@cspan.org or at twitter.com/cspanwj or on our Facebook page. Errol is on the phone, Waldorf, Maryland, Republican line. Good morning.
Good morning, Steve and guest. I'm really glad to speak with you this morning and see you in the beautiful new studio. I'm a federal employee and I work for the Department of Health and Human Services. And I, like many of my federal colleagues, were appalled at this revelation of what took place in this waste of money. And I would like the American people to know that this is not representative of what goes on in the federal government or at most of the agencies. But my question is, it regards the fact that this took place back in 2010, and my question is, where was Congress for so long in their oversight responsibilities to have had their hearings, you know, I would imagine with the first opportunity to be over a year ago? Why did it take so long? Thanks for taking my question, and I'll listen to you off the air.
Thank you, Errol.
Well, I think the Congress is responding to that Inspector General's report that was just released, and so all oversight takes some time, and in this case it was that the tips to the Inspector General occurred I think just after that hearing, after that conference took place, and it took the time to do their inquiry and release their report, and that's what the Congress is reacting to.
Our guest is a graduate of Smith College and earned her master's at Johns Hopkins University in Maryland. Danielle Bryan is the executive director of the Project on Government Waste, and the website is pogo.org. As you go to that, you'll see where are all the watchdogs, also a look at nuclear waste and other topics. What else can they find on your site?
We actually were created over 30 years ago by insiders in the Pentagon who were concerned about waste and fraud in federal spending, and we have continued to work with those insiders across the federal government now, uncovering those problems and then working to solve them.
Next is Richard on the phone from Wesley Chapel, Florida. Actually, we'll go to Patty next in Seattle, Washington. Patty, go ahead, please.
Yeah, I just wanted to make a comment about this spending. The people were elected in 2010 to take care of this. That's what the problem was. There was nobody doing any oversight. That's why the Tea Party got activated and got these people in there to work on that. But where the Senate is still controlled by the Democrats, they can't get anything through. And that's the big problem. It has nothing to do with anything but with the Senate itself, where they can't get anything through for bills and for passages of the cutbacks and the waste and stuff. And that's all I had to say.
Thank you, Patty.
I have to say I've been in Washington a long time, and both parties are pretty responsible for the problem, and both parties have some people who are trying to fix them. So I would say not to put your faith in either of the parties in that sense.
What about faith in the media? Because there's this comment from Chris, the media supposed to be a pillar of government oversight, now a department of the government. Are we in the media doing our job?
I would say not. I wouldn't entirely blame the media for that. We're watching consolidation of media, so there are fewer outlets, there are fewer resources that are being put into investigative journalism, and what we're finding in our sector, in the nonprofit sector, is we are actually increasing our role as sort of helping to amplify the media to try to help do the job the media used to do.
Ivy is on the phone from Raven Gap, Georgia. Independent line, good morning. Welcome to the program.
Hey, good morning. Thank you for taking up this subject. My observation or question is about actually the role of oversight in general, because the Congress seems to be focused more on the appearance of a meeting, the appearance of oversight, and much less on the actual oversight. Because if you watch the hearings that you broadcast on C-SPAN, you'll see a congressman come in or a senator come in, they'll ask their question, and then they'll leave. They really have no thought or no sense of continuity of what's happening within an entire hearing. Mm-hmm. And so because of that, oversight seems meaningless in that sense. So is there a way to actually compel congressmen to actually sit in, listen to an entire meeting instead of come in, leave? What are they doing outside of the hearing?
Thanks for the call. We'll get a response. Danielle Bryan.
That's actually heartbreaking to see that really is what we are often left with in the Congress. We at POGO began, I think at this point it's about 7 or 8 years ago, conducting monthly training sessions for congressional staff on how to do oversight, because the art of oversight has really been lost in a lot of ways. There's so much turnover of staff. It's the youngest congressional staff in history because they don't have a historical knowledge to know how to conduct the oversight. And part of the underlying reason for that is members of Congress are spending so much of their time raising money to get reelected. They aren't putting the time into doing this job. You know, in Article 1 of the Constitution, this is something that's such an important part of the role of Congress, and we're very concerned that that's not taken nearly seriously enough.
Let me go back to the issue of Representative Issa. Joe wanted to know, is he desperate for a scandal? Which is probably one of the lines of questions he's going to get today from NBC's David.
We certainly believe that real oversight is not about gotcha, not about trying to prove the other side is the bad guy, but actually identifying problems and trying to fix them. This is the kind of thing that this being the GSA conference, is ridiculous waste. There's no doubt about it. I think it's silly to say this is a particular administration's fault. This is the kind of thing that can happen when there isn't enough oversight, frankly, by the Congress as well as the executive branch. And I see this in the end of the day also as sort of a success story for the Inspector General of that agency. One of the things you referenced that's on our website is the fact that there are 10 agencies that don't have an Inspector General right now. That's the kind of thing that really worries us.
You focus on government waste, but in our first 45 minutes we were looking back at Watergate, the impact that it's had on American politics. We certainly now have the creation of the FEC as a direct result of what happened with Watergate. But whether it's a campaign or government in general, is there more transparency today than there was 30, 40 years ago?
Well, first of all, we don't just focus on waste. We look at all kinds of corruption and other misconduct. And I would say that because of some really fundamental laws like the Freedom of Information Act, there is more transparency in some ways. On the other hand, when you're looking at the national security arena, I think there's far less transparency, and that's where far more of what the government is actually doing is being conducted under secrecy in that sense, and we're terribly worried about that kind of secrecy.
Who funds Project on Government Oversight?
We are largely funded by foundations and individuals who have no financial interest in the outcome of our investigations. We don't take any money from unions, corporations, or any governments.
You have been executive director for how many years?
Well, I've been there for 22 years, I think. Long time.
And you stayed there that long because?
I love my work. I work with incredible people, and I get up every morning and excited to get there again.
We'll go to Wayne next in Birmingham, Alabama. Good morning. Welcome to the conversation, Wayne. Go ahead.
Good morning to you. I think that you have to really analyze this as leadership from the top. When you see the president's wife having to leave 4 hours earlier than the president and take an entire plane, 757, and a whole entourage of people to go on vacation, not waiting 4 hours. And then you see the lavish parties at the White House. I think leadership starts at the top, and if you don't want to set the example for these people like the GSA folks to say, hey, it's okay to just waste this money because, hey, this is how we're supposed to act when we're in government. And I wanted to say to Gladys earlier that George Bush wasn't looking in the Oval Office for weapons of mass destruction. He was trying to make sure there weren't any female interns still stuck in there.
Okay, that was an earlier point about an earlier topic, but to the caller's first point?
I think that in general we do need to revisit the concept that this is the taxpayers' money, and often there are people inside the government that aren't treating it that way. However, most people are. Most people in the federal government really are trying to do their job, and I think it's dangerous to overinflate that this kind of ridiculous behavior is something that's that endemic. But I think it's also important to see that people did lose their jobs right away. As soon as this came public, the head of the GSA was asked to resign, and I think that's the kind of accountability that you need in this case.
Another email, or actually a Twitter from one of our viewers saying, what happened to having the bills online for 72 hours before they are signed?
Yeah, that's an important thing, and it hasn't happened yet as far as I know, and I think that's an essential role. Congress is going to be probably one of the last places to implement the kind of transparency they talk about. We need a lot more transparency in the Congress for sure.
Our next call is James from Chattanooga, Tennessee. Good morning. Welcome to the program.
Yes, good morning. I would like to add another aspect to this conversation, and that conversation is that this partisanship is going on with Representative Isa. What you'll notice is most of those workers are career workers. They was working when George Bush was in office. So what President Obama should have did was put his own people in place, but you cannot do that because they are career workers. What I would like to see in this oversight is there's $12 million a day that is missing in Afghanistan and Iraq. I don't mind money being spent on American citizens who actually pay these taxes. These taxes that these people keep talking about, different people want different taxes paid for different things, but everyone pays them. Also, if you really look at it, the situation, what the basic Republicans are doing are trying to scandalize this. The most important thing should have been that President Obama's safety, not looking and seeing where money and stuff was spent. There should be no amount of money in order to protect our president.
James, thanks for the call. Did you want to respond?
Well, there's one point you're making that I think is absolutely right, which is this was a relatively minor amount of money in the context of how the government spends money. This was less than $1 million on a stupid conference, frankly. But for example, the Commission on Wartime Contracting concluded that $30 to $60 billion are wasted or wrongly spent in Iraq and Afghanistan. That's a lot of money. And there has been a pathetic amount of oversight from the Congress on that question. Where has that money gone? What are we doing with it? And so that's what becomes frustrating is you get 4 hearings on, yes, sensational stupidity, but you're not getting the serious oversight on the real dollars that we really need to be looking into.
Which goes back to my earlier point, is you watch this story unfold on cable. You have pictures from Las Vegas, so you have the Las Vegas backdrop for this story as opposed to the situation, as you pointed out, up to $60 billion in waste in Iraq and Afghanistan. We covered those hearings looking into wartime contracting. Mm-hmm. Is it because it's an easier story to tell Las Vegas versus what's happening with contracts in Iraq?
Absolutely. And actually, I will give them a little bit of a break because we all know what a meal should cost. And so it's easy when you start to see extraordinary expenses or things happening like magicians and commemorative coins. We know because in our lives we know we wouldn't spend money like that. It is harder to know how much should you spend on a war? How much does it cost for logistics? That does become more complicated because those aren't intuitively obvious to us. But I think the Congress needs to step up and rely on the work like that of the Commission to understand they did do the work to figure out what it should have cost. And that's why, in the end, you don't get the hearings because it's actually more complicated. Our
next call is Lisa from Oklahoma City. Good morning, Independent Line. Lisa, go ahead, please.
Good morning. I think the Oversight Committee should be just that, oversight. All of this should be looked at before a penny is spent. You know, if Congress would do their job, maybe we wouldn't have all this wasteful spending in our government. Sure enough, government is only reflective of the people of the United States. We pay for certain services, and the Oversight Committee is not doing their job when they allow expenditures of this amount.
Lisa, thanks for the call, which goes back to your earlier point, Danielle Bryan, about oversight or lack thereof in
There's
Congress.
no doubt that the Congress needs to do far more work on oversight. I don't think I would buy into the idea that the government shouldn't be spending money without the Congress approving it first. I mean, in some senses, of course, the Congress approves appropriations, and so that already is occurring. But you have to, at some level, have agencies that are competent and qualified to do their job so that there can be sort of the spot checks by the Congress on the big ticket items or the more difficult items. But we need to have both branches of government working.
From Michelle, has the problem been exacerbated because of the stalling of appointments in these agencies? And then following up, doesn't Congress share part of this blame when it comes to the nomination process and those nominations being confirmed in the Senate?
There's no doubt that that's true. I think of the 10 inspectors general who are not currently seated in their position, there are a couple of nominations that have been held up by the Senate. On the other hand, there have been a number, and the one that we're most concerned about is the State Department that is going on over 4 years without even a nominee for a permanent inspector general, and that can't be blamed on the Congress.
There's this from CBS Sports. The potential Clemens jurors question the cost of congressional hearing, and the story points out that prosecutors and the judge in the Roger Clemens retrial are finding potential jurors who view the congressional hearings where he allegedly lied as a waste of money, which could pose a serious hurdle to convicting the baseball pitcher of perjury about which he used drugs. And Kiki, Kathleen Wright, saying hearing on fraud in Congress, 6 people will show up, but put a baseball player, the full room. Priorities in this country are wrong.
I totally agree with that. I thought those steroids in baseball hearings were absurd. I didn't think that was the place of the Congress, but everyone paid attention, and that was, to be fair to Darrell Issa, that was not under his watch. He wasn't the chair at the time. So we see that the Congress sometimes, you know, they like to get on television, and the television really obliged on that one.
So are we to blame?
Part of the problem, for sure. Part of the problem. I think, you know, television, except maybe C-SPAN, really cares about ratings. And can we get people to focus, for example, much bigger problem at the GSA in terms of dollar amounts is something called the industrial funding fee. And this is essentially, the GSA is the buyer for the entire federal government. And right now they have a perverse incentive where the bigger the contract, they get a percentage of that at the agency. It's essentially a slush fund that the agency itself gets back. So the bigger the contract, the bigger the percent they get. It's a crazy incentive. They have no incentive to cut costs down. That's a really important issue, but are you going to get hearings on it? I don't think so. And you're not going to get it covered on anywhere but C-SPAN.
Danielle Bryan, who is the Executive Director of the Project on Government Oversight, as we look at government waste and oversight, the role of Congress, what it is and isn't doing. Jim is on the phone, Cedar Creek, Nebraska. Good morning.
Good morning. This is a great introduction because isn't C-SPAN, if I'm not mistaken, isn't it paid for by all the cable companies and stuff? And this lady, I mean, bless her heart, but she does bring her ideology with her. For instance, saying that there's no IG inside the State Department. Doesn't Obama want somebody looking over his shoulder? And the other thing, because I know he can make appointments and go against the Constitution. I mean, he's already proved that, so we know that. And as far as oversight before Congress spent money, Solyndra, remember Solyndra? And they were told, no, you can't do this one, you can't do this one. But Obama had this TV appearance he had to do, and it was green energy and everything. So he does what he always does, what he wants, and not what Congress wants, or the people. And this GSA is the government employees kicking us in the face. What would you do if you gave somebody a credit card and told them they could go ahead and use it for a little trip and come back?
Okay, Jim, we'll get a response.
Actually, that was the point I was making, is that President Obama has not nominated an Inspector General at the State Department, and that is on his watch, that he has allowed his entire administration essentially without an Inspector General at that agency. So I think that that's sort of the point, that he is to blame for not nominating an Inspector General for a number of the agencies. Others are actually being held up by the Senate. And at the end of the day, you need to have a balance. You need to have a strong IG. Just having an IG isn't in itself enough. There was actually an Inspector General at what was called the Special Inspector General for Afghanistan Reconstruction, and he was actually no good. And we actually worked with Senators Grassley and Coburn and McCaskill to have him removed. So just having someone there isn't enough. You have to have someone who's good at their job.
And we do get our funding from the cable industry, about 6 cents per month per cable subscriber. That funds the 3 networks, our radio station heard coast to coast on XM Channel 119 and our website offerings, and we are commercial free, and we are a nonprofit, a public service by the cable industry. So thank you for your support to help pay for C-SPAN operations here in Washington and around the country. Barbara, Austin, Texas, you're next. Good morning.
Good morning. While I was on hold, I heard something that has always bothered me, and it's this attitude that $1 million is not real dollars, or it's small potatoes compared to the really important things. I think if you have principles, it should apply for every dollar, not just the billions that some people think are the only ones that matter. So this $1 million waste is, to me, a symptom of really deep lack of principles. But I do have an experience I wanted to mention, and I've never heard of Ms. Bryan's organization before. Maybe she needs to contact 60 Minutes or some of the other investigative TV shows, and then people would listen. But does she issue any reports? Does her organization issue any reports that detail the waste, not just general PR, but anything that details the exact examples of waste? And then my experience, years ago, I took a job as a government worker. It was on the state level, but I worked as a social worker, and it was appalling to me to find out that near the end of the budget year, we were told, oh, we've got this extra money we haven't spent, so go out and buy new furniture. Spend it somehow. We've got to spend it so we'll get the same amount next year.
Barbara, thanks. You put a lot of issues on the table. We're short on time. Appreciate the call. We'll get a response.
I certainly agree that $1 million is still $1 million, and all of our tax dollars go towards that. And of course, as we were discussing earlier, it is a worthy conversation for the Congress to be not only conducting oversight, but holding people accountable for wasting that kind of money. My point, though, is that we shouldn't stop there. We should have the oversight of the bigger issues as well. I think that's where we're really not seeing the work done that really needs to be done by the Congress in terms of oversight. And definitely, I welcome you to come to the pogo.org website. You'll see endless reports that detail, in excruciating detail, we're really nerdy, and we get into the weeds on the issues to show exactly where the waste and misconduct is and how to fix the problems. For example, we have a Spending Smarter plan where we show $600 billion over 10 years that could be cut from wasteful spending in the national security arena.
Does the government listen?
A lot of the times it does. We, over time, have really been able to persuade, cajole, whatever words you might say, to get either executive branch or Congress to start taking on some of our recommendations. So that's part of why I love my job, is that we actually have some great successes.
And Jan has this point: who audits the federal agencies? Anyone?
Yes, well, there's a number of different auditing elements. Of course, the Congress has an arm called the General Accounting Office that is full of auditors that do important work, helping the Congress do the audits. And then there are other agencies like the Defense Contract Audit Agency that unfortunately is not doing the quality work it used to do. That's one of the targets that we'd love to sort of strengthen their capacity. And then you have all these inspectors generals that there's actually 73 of them now across the federal government, and they of course have auditors as well.
Next call is John from Atlanta. Good morning.
Good morning. I'm going to be short and sweet because I know we're short on time. I just wanted to mention to Ms. Bryan that Mr. Issa, who's over the Oversight Committee, I'm talking about Representative Issa, should stop his witch hunting, because all he's trying to do is find some kind of link to blame President Obama, and that's pretty much all I want to say. Thank you.
I have to say, I had high hopes for Congressman Issa when he was becoming the chairman. When he had been in the minority, he did some terrific oversight of the former Minerals Management Service at the Department of Interior and their lack of accountability in holding the oil and gas industry accountable. And that was during a Republican administration. We actually gave him a Good Government Award at that time because he was going against the party, really, and pointing out problems in a Republican administration. But I have to say that to some extent, the investigations that his committee has undertaken really do appear too partisan for us.
And with regard to the GSA, James Ard saying it's not the money wasting, it's the mocking us. Is that the sentiment that many taxpayers have?
We didn't talk about that, but there was some YouTube videos of GSA officials that actually were mocking the fact that the IG is never going to catch us doing this. I mean, that really gets you, you know? I mean, that's where it was so insulting. And yeah, that's true. It was outrageous.
In a sentence, the mission statement of the Project on Government Oversight is what?
We aim to create a more effective, accountable, open, and transparent federal government.
And the website is pogo.org, and you also blog at Pogo Blog?
That's right.
Danielle Bryan. I'm sorry?
I said look us up.
Thanks very much for being with us. The Executive Director of the Project on Government Oversight. Please come back again.
Thanks very much.
When we come back, we're going to turn our attention